viewers, I'm Raji. Thank you so much for watching. You're about to watch an interview that I did with 31-year Canadian constitutional lawyer Rocco Galati. Rocco is suing the Canadian government and the CBC on behalf of his client, Vaccine Choice Canada, and 7 other plaintiffs for some of the extreme measures taken during COVID-19 by the government. Some of these specific measures caused physical and psychological harm. According to the claim, the specific measures of social distancing, self-isolation, compulsory wearing of masks, and the arbitrary closure of businesses violates sections 2, 7, 8, 9, and 15 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Here's a quick clip of Rocco giving us a summary of his claim.
In a nutshell, my clients seek, as against the government actors, declaratory relief. We don't seek monetary damages, and as against CBC, we seek $11 million for their tortious transgressions. Essentially against the government, we seek declarations that, number one, both Trudeau and Premier Ford have effectively dispensed with Parliament and are ruling under the pretense of royal prerogative contrary to our Constitution. Secondly, declarations that the COVID measures are neither scientifically nor medically based, that they are extreme, unwarranted, and are causing severe damages.
For those of you who know me and know my work, you know that the heart plays a giant role in how I live my daily life. I have learned through practice and experience that truth resides in the heart, and you can feel it. If something doesn't feel right, usually it isn't. And right now in society, I see some major trust issues playing out, and rightfully so. It's really challenging right now to know who to trust, how to trust, what to trust. And yet I see this as an amazing opportunity for us to strengthen a power and intelligence that lives within us. Straight up, my heart told me to do this interview, and this is exactly what I'm doing. Born in Calabria, Italy, Rocco Galati immigrated with his family to Canada in 1965. He was named one of the top 25 influential lawyers by Canadian Lawyer magazine in 2014 and 2015 in 2 different categories. He speaks 6 languages and was an elected bencher of the Law Society of Ontario in the 2015 to 2019 term. You might remember Rocco's name from 2013 when he successfully had an appointed Supreme Court of Canada judge removed, forever effecting the constitutional laws of the Supreme Court of Canada. Throughout his career, Galati has won some huge cases in the administrative and constitutional areas of the law, litigated on all levels of court, including the Supreme Court of Canada. His latest challenge has him taking on the Government of Canada once again, in a lawsuit that's without controversy. Rocco's not the type of person to shy away from a challenge, and he believes no one is above the law, not even government. He often quotes Bob Dylan's saying, "Don't ask me nothing about nothing. I just might tell you the truth." Oh hey, quick reminder, even though we filmed in his office, Rocco is still a guest in my house. And in the spirit of House of Raji, where you are free to speak safely and comfortably, it's important to remember that while I don't share all of the sentiments and opinions of my guests, I still respect them and try to hold space for the expression of what wants to be shared. Okay, thanks so much. I'll see you on the other side. Rocco, thank you so much for joining me today and having me in your office.
Well, thanks for invading my office, Raji. I appreciate it.
No problem. Well, we have a lot to talk about.
Okay.
So let's kind of just dive in. What is it that makes you want to take these cases on? Let's start there.
Well, that's a complicated question. Frankly, when I was coming up through the ranks and after I got a license as a lawyer in 1989, people forget this society has always had a racist twinge. Mm-hmm. So when I was at the Department of Justice in Toronto, where 17% of the lawyers are Italo-Canadian, of a couple hundred lawyers, there was only 2 of us who were Italian. Mm-hmm. I was ranked 40 before I got hired. 39 people had to turn the job down before they hired me. Mm-hmm. So when I came out on my own in 1990, I wasn't getting any referrals. So what I got were the hard cases the shellac that other lawyers either didn't want or that they were peeing their pants trying to figure out what to do. Wow. So I got nothing but the hard cases referred to me, and so I did them.
In your early years?
In my, not early years, my very day out in private practice in 1990.
Yeah.
And I started with those cases, and I was winning them. And so I then got a reputation for doing hard cases. Now, that was on the practical business side. On a philosophical side, I've only ever done cases against the government because, frankly, look, if you have a private dispute, right? If you have a private dispute, you should be able to settle it reasonably with another person. And my view is in life you have three types of partners: business partners, life partners, and sexual partners. So with respect to business partners and life partners, when a business partnership breaks down or if marriage breaks down, why go to a lawyer? Why don't you just sit down and settle it? So I'm not interested in those because people are irrational when it comes to those relationships. But when the government's after you, it's an institution. There's very little room for negotiating a reasonable settlement. My primary expertise is as a tax litigator. I started as a tax litigator at the Department of Justice, and I have my Master's of Law in Tax. Yeah. Listen, there are two Gestapo-like agencies in Canada: Canada Revenue Agency and Immigration Canada, and you have not met the fascists until you meet those two agencies. Yeah. So that's why I do these kinds of cases. And for me, philosophically, I see governments, all governments, as the institutional manifestation of the beast in Homo sapien. Think about this for a second. Who else but governments engage regularly all over the world in acts such as war, genocide, crimes against humanity, and all sorts of nasty, systematic violations of human rights, right? Petty criminal gangs don't do that, right? So while people see their government as their protector and guardian of the public welfare, that's a bit delusional. Historically, your government is the most dangerous institution that surrounds you.
And hence the reason why we put things like the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in place to protect citizens from the tyranny of what the government could become.
Exactly. So, don't forget, Raji, that all bills of rights, Charter of Rights, the American Bill of Rights, the French Declaration of the Rights of Man, the English Bill of Rights of 1688, the Magna Carta of 1215, all those rights accruing to the citizens in a constitutional document that was entrenched as a supreme law, all resulted from either insurrection, revolution, civil war, or out-and-out world wars.
Where does like the social contract and all that stuff come in then? Because it's presumed that if we don't have the social contract, if we don't uphold it, then it's going to be chaos, civil war, and so then we have one sovereign that we trust, which I think is the government that's enacting that. And so is that what's been played out for all these years now?
I think the social contract is one of those placebo sugar pills that everybody swallowed without actual close analysis, okay? When Jean-Jacques Rousseau articulated the notion of the social contract, and all the Enlightenment thinkers of the Age of Reason articulated that social contract, while in theory it's a good idea, it never was really implemented. The social contract is a sucker's game because it puts the government. So you have a social contract, which is hard to really define because there's so many different political differences, and then you're supposed to entrust somebody in power to safeguard and dispense that social contract. Well, that's just
sovereign,
naive.
The one sovereign.
Yeah, right. An enlightened sovereign back then.
Right.
But that's just guff.
Okay, just from what I learned from biblical studies, I guess, is that each individual is a sovereign, and you have the choice. You must enact your sovereignty. Well,
I mean, that's the notion. That's the Catholic notion of free will. From Thomas Aquinas and going up. I'm closer to Nietzsche. I mean, there is no such thing as free will. By the time you even articulate in your own mind that you have a free will, you've been hammered on the anvil. You have so many layered, complex matrix of neuroses, fears, insecurities. Your personality, your social structure is already intact. So we delude ourselves into thinking we have free will. Now, that notion went on steroids as a distraction by the powers that be during the 1990s in North America with the so-called identity politics, right? And political correctness. So while everybody under the sun was getting PhDs on am I this, am I that, or am I that, the powers that be were corralling and monopolizing the socioeconomic structures. They were taking over the economy, and you're still sitting there looking at your navel. Okay? So I don't understand any of that in practical terms. I'm an anarchist. And by that, I don't mean a purveyor of chaos as it's maligned in North America. An anarchist believes in self-reliance. I mean, David Thoreau, Ralph Emerson, American philosophers, they were basically anarchists. So the English don't refer to anarchy, they refer to libertarianism. I'm more of a libertarian. I say, leave me alone, I'll take care of myself. If I choose on my own terms, I'll help my brothers and sisters. But the government should have very minimal presence in my life. Because what is the government after all? It's just a collection of individuals. So when we pretend that a government is more than a collection of individuals, like the Liberal Party or the PC Party, we're deluding ourselves. I have my theories as to why that happens. We are essentially, as human beings, an alpha mammal. Our DNA gravitates to a hierarchical structure. So no matter how much we fight to be equal, this happens throughout history. The ebbs and flows are like this: revolutions, civil wars, wars. Now we're back to this now. But in fact, we're back to, now we're like this.
Actually, it's coming in. The whole system's coming down.
So now we got fascism and control on steroids now.
So let's take it back, fast forward to the current case you're working on. What really gets you about this case with VCC? What's got you?
Well, as we plead in the statement of claim, they are using the excuse of, quote, a pandemic. This is not a pandemic and this is not an epidemic. The WHO and the CDC define an epidemic as one in which 7% of your population dies. We're at less than 1/4%. That's less than 1/4%. 0.00024. That is in line with your annual influenza death rate from complications of the influenza manifested through pneumonias and that. 84% of those who purportedly have died from the COVID in Canada are all the elderly in long-term care. They've admitted now that because of the bogus way they classify something as a COVID death, that the numbers they actually give are anywhere between 54 to 63% overestimated. So in Canada, we've had just a little bit over 9,000, so at the most 4,500, or as little as 3,000 have died from complications of the COVID. That's in line with some low influenza years. So the measures they've taken, self-isolation, social distancing, masking, right? Confiscation of businesses on an arbitrary and illogical basis that simply favor large corporations. None of this is scientifically or medically based. Okay, none of it's scientifically or medically based.
How is self-isolation infringing my rights or violating my rights?
It's called house arrest, hello? Right? And house arrest is a form of detention. Okay? for no good reason.
It's all in the name of public health and safety. And sorry, I'm just going to read the first paragraph of the claim just so people have a good understanding and idea. So it says, the first paragraph of the claim, a declaration that the COVID measures taken and orchestrated by Prime Minister Trudeau and the federal crown constitute a constitutional violation of dispensing with Parliament under the pretense of royal prerogative, contrary to the English Bill of Rights, 1689, as read into our unwritten constitutional rights through the preamble of the Constitution Act 1867, emanating from the unwritten constitutional principles of rule of law, constitutionalism, and democracy, as insinuated by the Supreme Court of Canada.
Simply put, all that says is, look, Charles I got his head chopped off because he dispensed of Parliament and he pretended to rule England by royal prerogative. Well, that's been unconstitutional since 1688. Okay. When you read the English Bill of Rights as a result of that civil war, it said that they're abolishing the dispensing of Parliament under the pretense of royal prerogative. I'm actually quoting the terms of that 1688 Bill of Rights. So what's happened during the COVID? Yeah. Is Parliament sitting? No. When they do sit, it's on a pre-selected 25 MPs. Yeah. Well, we have 300 and something MPs. Mm-hmm. Is your Parliament functioning when the party selects not even 7% of those MPs? You have the right to vote. You have the right to elect MPs. Right. Our Parliament is de facto been suspended by not only Trudeau, but by Ford and every other provincial premier. Now they're saying, and furthermore, we're delegating to our ministers, not even cabinet, to make regulations. Yeah. Well, that's what was happening under the kings that ruled by divine sovereign right. Yeah. Louis XIV and a lot of those criminals. We're going back 600 years, 400, 500 years.
Like you look at, Ford and Tory, and they assume these ultimate powers in a way. They were able to make these changes and implement mandatory regulations without
Parliament.
Yeah.
And look at what happened in New Zealand 2 days ago. What happened? The Prime Minister said, we're suspending elections because of the COVID. Doesn't that sound familiar? I'm not politically correct. That's what happened when in countries we used to call banana republics, right? Or in Putin's Russia. So now we've turned into a popsicle republic, right?
Well, what do you think about what's happening in Australia right now, in Melbourne?
Well, that's just Johannesburg under apartheid. That's Johannesburg under apartheid. You needed a pass to walk the streets and go from zone to zone. Yeah. And what's happening in New Zealand? They're coming house to house, testing everybody, and who's ever positive, they're going to send to a quarantine camp and forcefully inject them with a vaccine. And that makes me laugh, not in the comical sense, but it's just outrageous because they have not yet identified the virus. What are they testing for? Fragments of DNA sequences in coronaviruses at large. People have to understand they have not isolated, purified, reproduced, and tested the virus in animal testing. So, before you can identify a virus, you have to isolate it, purify it, that is, get all the crap that floats around it, then reproduce it to make sure that you're not reproducing garbage, then doing tests to make sure that that's the virus that's causing what you say are the symptoms. Okay, they haven't done that yet. Yeah. And so what are they testing door to door with soldiers at the door? All they're testing is how far can we enslave, control, and push people before they push back. And the reason they're doing it in New Zealand and Australia is because they don't have an entrenched constitutional Supreme Bill of Rights like we do in North America and Europe, so people can't even take it to court. So my prediction is if the powers that be don't see a massive pushback, we're looking at similar powers in the second wave in the fall. Coming.
North America.
And that's something else that really makes me scratch my bald head. I hesitate to do it because I'm losing hair, and it's painful to scratch it. But when I hear Dr. Teresa Tam tell me what the virus is going to do this September, this October, in 2021, and 2022, I say, and I tweeted this to her, well, you must have planned it, because I've never seen a virus that acts in accordance with a government schedule. I've never seen a virus that actually follows the government rules. So you stand at the entrance of a restaurant now, and you've got the mask on. They walk you 20 feet to your table, you sit down, you take off the mask. You're sitting 6 feet away from another table of people, but you're safe. Why? Because the virus knows to stop just before it enters your nostrils, because you're following the rules. Now, are we that stupid?
It hurts my brain.
It's painful, It's painful. It's irrational.
It doesn't make sense.
On top of which, all the science says, the properly done scientific studies, that is, controlled studies, not anecdotal, not observational, controlled studies, for the last 25 years say masks do not stop the flow of an airborne virus. End of story.
What they're saying online, because I just researched it, they're saying that this virus spreads through droplets. When someone sneezes, coughs, or exhales. Okay, and if you are in proximity of that person who's infected, you're going to get it.
Okay, so first of all, let me chastise you for doing research online. 14 Hail Marys. You mentioned Christian research before. But secondly, okay, that's what they're saying to our upcoming masking injunction we're bringing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's use our common sense. I tell people, forget the science. Let's use our common sense. I don't think there's anybody who hasn't coughed or sneezed.
Yeah.
Okay? The actual controlled studies, right, say that when you cough or sneeze, it goes 16 to 20 feet. Nobody is socially distanced 16 to 20 feet. Okay, so it's supposed to stop the droplets. Two things to say to that. If that's true, the droplets, you don't breathe droplets in. Before it gets into your system, it still has to. With the droplets come the airborne viruses, okay? Yeah. You're not breathing in droplets. Yeah. And even if it's communicated that way, compared to just the airflow and breathing, it's a very minuscule percentage of how it's transferred, okay? Second of all, and this is where I don't believe the liars, okay? If that's true, then why do we have to be muzzled like chihuahuas with the cloth mask where you can't identify the person? If they're just worried about the big droplets, why don't we just say, okay, wear one of those face visors? Mm-hmm. At least you can breathe properly.
And see the person.
You can be understood. But no, they're not doing that. Yeah. We're chihuahuas.
So tell me what you think about the masks and why they are mandating them? Why are they compulsory?
Very simple. Listen, for the first 4 months, they were telling you, and this is something people should also use their common sense. Mm-hmm. If they really believe everything they're saying, they should be fired for incompetence. Teresa Tam, for 4 months, said, no masks, it's proven don't work. Yeah. All of a sudden, no, the science is clear, they work. Really? And she's at the helm? Mm-hmm. And it's the same with every public health officer. Mm-hmm. The masks are a lockstep, are one of the steps in the calculated steps that they've been using to not only control us, but through control, to fragment and separate the social cohesion, which is human community and society. So first they started by saying, we're all going to die. Mm-hmm. We're all going to die. And of course,
stay inside, stay home.
Stay home, self-isolation, planes around it, everything. And because the fear of death and survival is the strongest instinct we possess, for good reason, everybody freezes. Okay, so everybody's self-isolated. And then they say, when you go out, don't go closer than 6 feet. Yeah. So that we went through that. But at 6 feet, people were still hanging around parking lots on the sidewalk. I saw them. And they were talking 6 feet apart. Then they said, okay, next measure, because I actually did the first two. Yeah. You got a mask now. Yeah. So now we're masking. What do you notice as soon as we masked? People are not standing around 6 feet apart in masks talking. Now, human discourse has been that much more removed. Okay? The next one, is going to be the mandatory vaccines with the microchip so they can survey you wherever you go.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's take the other aspects of the self-isolation, social distancing, and the lockdown. Let's look at the economic aspects, because that's where the game is being played.
Yeah.
So they said, well, we have to close all these non-essential businesses. So if you're not selling food or medicine, you remember early on in the pandemic, you had to close down.
Yeah.
Except Walmart, Costco, all the big operations, because they were selling food in a corner along with some medicine, they got to sell everything else that everybody else was forced to close down on. There was such a massive independent business to corporate transfer of sales and commodities and wealth that you would need an abacus and a calculator at the same time to sort of count up. Now, does that make any common sense to anybody? If you own a mom and pop shop, you might get one person or two people an hour. Very easy to maintain social distance. Crowded Walmart, in a crowded mall, and they're trying to keep people away from each other. Does that make sense? And you can't socially distance and go to a church, for instance, but you can go to a Walmart. That's why some people were holding services in Walmarts.
Right.
And why can't you go to a church? Because you might actually talk to each other and say, hey, Bob, what do you think of this COVID? Well, I think it's a crock of shit. See, they alienated us from having a discussion. You say, oh, yeah, but we have social media. Oh, but wait.
The censorship.
Social media is controlled by the same criminal corporations. There is no discussion on social media because everything contrary to the official Roman Catholic inquisitorial line is pulled down as heresy by YouTube and Facebook. Thank God, Robert Kennedy's foundation yesterday filed lawsuit against Facebook. But so you see what's happening there is that the corporations have cornered the physical supply of goods and services, right? And now we have contact tracing. So it's all about surveillance, which was the plan to begin with. We have surveillance through the cell phones, and they want to affect through the vaccine microchipping. And people say, well, why didn't they do it before? Because before 5G came around, they didn't have the bandwidth, the technology, the scale to be able to survey every person on Earth. Now they do.
Why do they want to control and survey people on Earth? It's almost like an obsession with controlling. I guess it comes down to power, because everything that I've felt in the last 4 or 5 months, it has been disempowering, disenfranchising, taking people's rights, stripping them. Strip.
I mean, you forget, if you're a free thinker and you can see through it, it's disenfranchising. If you're not, it's demeaning, debilitating, depressing to the clinical point of suicide. Our suicide rates have jumped 4 times.
Yeah, no one's talking about that.
Our drug overdose have jumped 4 to 5 times. Okay? And so why do we gravitate toward, why do they want to control? As I said before, we're an alpha species. There is a tendency to want to be the king at the top of the pyramid. And we do all sorts of ugly, nasty things to every society. And our struggle throughout history has been to temper that. And how have we done it? After revolutions and civil wars is through the notion of the rule of law that the Romans invented. But I wrote an article once where I described the rule of law as a blood-drenched roller coaster.
The rule of law?
Yes. It's a blood-drenched roller coaster ride because it has its glory peaks and its depraved valleys. And people think that once you attain it, it's self-perpetuating. It's like a garden. You got to perpetually de-weed it, take care of it, maintain it. And if you don't maintain it, we get back down to the lows. And we're there now.
Right. Well, let's talk about the scare. They feels like scare tactics, a lot of it. when I talk to my family, friends, and even people on the streets, there's a lot of fear. A lot of fear. Not only are they afraid of this virus that they might die from because, oh, I have a compromised immune system already, but I might get thrown in jail.
Yeah.
I might get fined.
Well, if you remember early on, the punk we respectfully referred to as the Prime Minister threatened to put in criminal code offense of disseminating misinformation on COVID. Now just think about this. He was purporting to want to criminalize thought and opinion and expression. Okay? Now, so not only is the Canadian government not doing anything, and we take them to task for it, to stop the censorship by social media, he encouraged the censorship by threatening criminal sanctions against people who hold Nobel Prizes in their field, eminent experts whose opinions are taken down by marijuana smoking fiends at YouTube for being misinformation. Now, where did they get off taking down the opinion of a Nobel Prize winner in his or her field?
And you're referring to the 43 experts.
We cite well over 3.5 dozen world and Canadian experts in our statement of claim who have been criticizing these measures from day one.
And they're Canadians.
And just all over the world. Yeah. And they have been censored. CBC has never done an interview with any of them. That's why we sued CBC.
Yes, I was going to go there next. Before we go to CBC, how difficult or easy was it to find these people that were willing to speak to you about, not being consulted or, on their expert opinion?
Well, we found them through news, through our network of experts, and I didn't speak to all of them. We found their posts, we found their articles, and we found the fact that they'd been pulled down from YouTube. And we know that they haven't been covered because CBC's never done anything but, printed a pornographic series of statistics that mean nothing. Out of context statistics. 3,729 people went to the bathroom today and did number 2. That's what CBC's been covering. That's about the level of analysis, right? 3,300 people were tested positive today. Tested for what? Using what? Do you know what you're even talking about? No.
Almost like a speaker box for the government.
Well, not almost like a speaker box, because a speaker box assumes a minimal amount of intelligence, right? More like a recording for the government.
So you're suing, CBC is named in the claim. It's a national publicly funded broadcaster. Like you said, they've suppressed, they've censored, they've unjustifiably belittled expert opinion.
Yes. So I cite an example, it's just a mere example, of Dr. Judy Mikovits, who they say, this virologist's statements on the documentary Plandemic have been debunked. Okay, and I look at that, and they show a picture of Dr. Judy Mikovits. They don't refer to her as doctor. They don't refer to her as a PhD. They forget to mention that she's a recognized world expert to this day, that she worked at the CDC for 12 years with Fauci. They make her look like a Missouri fortune teller, charged with witchcraft. Okay? Now that is malicious, it's intentional, it's calculated, and it's harmful. She is an expert speaking her mind. The fact that her mind is critical of the WHO, who are a gang of bought and sold non-experts, some of them, right? The fact that she disagrees with them, and do they say what was debunked? So when they use the word misinformation, right? It's the equivalent of 1700 Salem, Massachusetts, where they point and they say, witch, you're a witch. You don't have to show why, or even better, body snatchers, where they in the movie they go, right? They don't tell you what you said is misinformation, why it's misinformation,
It just is.
why they hold the truth, on what evidence. No, that's it. It's Roman Catholic inquisitorial heresy that they're advocating. Okay, so it's if you don't say that the world, if you say that the world is not flat, you're ostracized, demonized, charged, and you're a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see what's happening in the social media realms, and even when, you know, I look at some of my channels and some of the things that I post, and it's such a clear divide. You know, it's either you're on this side or you're on this side, and some people have awakened to the idea that they're just trying to divide people and pit people against each other. I think one of the most frustrating things to come out of this is the arbitrary way how measures, like, for example, the businesses. Some businesses were essential, some were not. And then you try to go into some, and sometimes you have to wear a mask and sometimes you don't. Like, you know, BC was doing something different than Ontario. Like,
well, to this day. Well, so why were the liquor stores essential?
Great question.
And children's clothing not, when my kids are growing by the day?
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, you can get your children's clothing at Walmart.
Or Amazon.
Or Amazon, right? Amazon had to hire 700,000 people within a month to keep up with the online orders.
I see Rocco as a very brave soul for taking on a mammoth of a case like this. I hope you got something out of it, and maybe are rethinking some of the measures that you've been subjected to and why. In part 2, things get a little animated. We get deeper into the claim, and Rocco states exactly how the measures violate and cause harm to individuals, especially a very vulnerable sector of society, children with special needs and the elderly. We go deeper into the masking issue, Bill Gates, the Rockefeller report, who's actually benefiting from all these measures, pushback from the people, and what are some next steps. To learn more about this case, check out the links in the description. Also, if you enjoyed what you saw, please consider subscribing to my channel. I put out a variety of content on all sorts of subjects. And you can check out part 2 of the Rocco interview right now on my channel. Remember, you can trust your heart. You just have to practice listening. Thank you so much for your attention. I'm Raji, and I'll see you next time.